The work session of the Annapolis City Council on Thursday, April 13th, 2023 will be called to order at 3:02. At this time, would you all join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. City Attorney, please present the first item on the agenda.
Yes, sir. The first item on the agenda under discussion is ID 4323, Budget Overview and Review of the City Council Budget Binder. Presenters, Finance Director Dickinson and Finance Department staff.
Welcome.
Are we ready to get started? Oh, okay. I feel like I need a booster chair on this chair, so sorry.
We put you at the kids' table.
Yeah. All right, so I guess I'll follow along with this one instead of trying to get it up on my computer, and then check on Katie's if I can't read it.
It's not on there, right?
Jody,
So we're televised.
a very brief statement.
I can't. Yes, I know, but
Normally the finance director sits there, so I figured if you wanted to.
Are we okay to go from the screen? Are you saying that you need it on your...
No, you don't have to, you can sit
Well,
up
we
there.
would try it from the screen, but it should be on there,
Yeah, we can send it to you. Are you saying you want the thing itself so you can follow, or you're gonna see the televised version of it?
right? We were looking for it in Granite. It's not on for the 13th for today.
I don't think you need me, but I'll be downstairs.
Well, who says?
We'll start and maybe we can follow up with that. And okay. Yep.
Gotta leave.
So you don't get that email
We
on?
wanted in Granite.
I don't know how fast that can happen, so I don't know.
Okay, it's never, email.
We'll make sure that both of those happen. Yeah.
Just start with the city manager.
Thank you,
you.
Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Michael Malinoff, City Manager. Very briefly, I first want to thank Jody, Katie, and Capri, is Capri coming up too, for all the hard work they've done. As I've mentioned previously in this discussion, I've been through a lot of budgets before, and I will say they've done an outstanding job putting it together and making it really relatively stress-free, other than the stress you put on yourself. So thank you. Yourself included, Jody. I look at the budget process as, in government, we often are dealing with a lot of questions of finance and funding and where we're going to spend money. And this process really is indicative of the saying that governance is the allocation of limited resources, and in particular, this component of it. And the way that I look at it is the mayor and council are the composers. You all are the Mozarts, the Wagners, the Tchaikovskys, whomever your favorite is. And you all, through this budget process, are composing so that then the administrative staff, primarily in my office, but others are then the conductors. We make sure that the different departments, whether it's the brass with our public safety or public works or you name it, then they are the orchestra implementing what you all are doing. So I wanted to mention that because that's the lens that I think I see and the rest of us live in this process, and we're now initiating it. And I hope it's enjoyable for you as it is for me. And we look forward to your composition. Thank you.
So, like I said, I'm going to try to read from here and go along with the presentation from the big screen. We put together this presentation. Thank you for this opportunity. For the record, I'm Jody Dickinson, Finance Director. To my right is Katie Conley, Budget Manager. And to my left is Capri Turner. She is our relatively new budget analyst that we hired. She came to us through a temp firm and worked in another position and then applied for this job when it came open. She's been very helpful. We're very glad to have her. Capri Turner. And so we put together this presentation to outline some of the information that's in the budget, information that you got on Monday night. The next slide, please. So to start, these are the documents you've been given, and we provided everyone with the binder. And just this outlines where they're at in your binder. The operating book, a very useful source, Section A. Section B, we put the capital book in the capital program. And next follows the legislation. And as you know, the legislation is really the legal document that establishes the budget, primarily the budget ordinance and the appendices, establishes the spending authority for all the departments, and provides in the appendices a breakdown of those amounts. We also have a fees resolution and a fines resolution with an attached, there are attached tables to both of those of updated fees and fines. I will comment that the ones that are in your binder, I believe they may have only printed one side. So we're going to be giving you a replacement one, a two-sided printed version. So those are coming to you shortly. We also have a resolution that sets up our pay plan, which establishes the pay scales and sets up any new positions that we have, any newly defined positions. I don't believe we have any newly defined positions this year, and has a few other provisions, miscellaneous provisions on pay issues. Does anybody have okay, let me know if you have questions along the way, and I'll try to get an answer for you.
And it's not really a question. What we got in the book, the binder, is double-sided. So you're going to give us the single-sided so we can put them in the separate tabs.
So we'll straighten this out. Some of the binders may have one-sided copies in them,
Oh,
right?
okay. Mine has a two-sided.
Fees and fines? The fees and fines resolution, if you look at
The whole book. So that we can separate it by department?
Okay, hold on just a second. That was the second question. First, on the first question, it was our understanding that the fees and fines tables have only printed on one side. You're supposed to have a two-sided copy
Okay,
because they're missing the back side.
okay,
So that you definitely need a replacement for those.
okay,
You want both pages.
yes.
And what was your second question about?
Well, I thought it was one question, but it was about the rest of the departments are also two-sided as opposed to one-sided. Because we can't put them in the dividers by department
Right.
because it would, you understand where I'm talking about?
Yes, so if, I will leave that up to each individual council person. If you want to divide the book into the different departments, and you may need to make a copy of one or the other pages in order to separate it, or just put them in the segments as close as you can to the departments. I would be glad to help you with that process if you want. I just don't want to have to recopy everything on one side for the use of your
I think
file.
we should just do that. Can we just do it one-sided?
Who's going to do it?
We'll do it.
I mean, we need the departments separate,
Oh,
okay? It doesn't mean you have to go back and copy everything on one-sided, but,
okay. Okay, so any of you who would like that done so that you can separate the departments into the separate tabs in your book, please let us know and we'll take care of that for you.
okay.
Okay?
Well,
Yeah,
that's what we've done, so I would like that.
yeah. So I know some of the council members just do it on electronic version the whole time, and some handle their books differently. So if that's what you want, we'll be glad to help you out with that.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
So you'll make a request if you need it individually?
Yeah, if you want it arranged in some other way to
So or
separate.
should we just decide now? Sheila needs it. Rhonda, do you need it one-sided? You're good. Do you need it one-sided, Ellie? Do you need it one-sided, Alderman Savage? No? Okay.
Okay, so I'm the odd man out. I think you
That's
will
good.
find as we go through this,
Yeah,
though, it's very
yeah.
beneficial to have it one-sided.
I agree. Yeah.
But-
No, I agree. It could be easier that way. And we're just trying to save paper. We're trying to save in the next few years.
Oh, sorry, Alderman Savage?
Just quick, will the position summary include, I always like to see vacancies that we may have. Will that be included in that list?
Thank you for bringing that up. We have done that in the past, and we'll be glad to give you a list of vacancies. Yes. So that is not on the list, but it should be. Thank you. We have a sheet of paper that is what we call our capital reserve tracker. That gives you the updated version of where the capital reserve fund is and where it will be at the end of '23 and at the end of '24, and it shows the individual projects that are pulling out of the reserve. The next thing is the one-time reserve tracker. That's also going to give you an update of where the one-time reserve monies are, what they've been used for, and where we believe they're going to end up at the end of each period. The
Title that the Dewan Gay tracker? He asked the question the other day.
I think everyone is interested in seeing that, and it tells you where we've spent it, and in some occasions, they don't get the project finished in this year or don't encumber at this period, and we put it back into the reserve for the next year. So there are some repeats where we add it back to the reserve and then take it back out again.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Sorry, Alderman
That's okay.
Charles. Yeah.
I'm looking at updates to position summaries, and I know that fire department has one as well, and it's not on that list.
Okay, so-
It might be I'm sure it's in the book.
So each department in their pages has what's called a summary table. And yes, there were a few that asked us to update their tables once they saw the drafted book. These are the ones that I know of. Fire, if you're talking about the new position,
Yes.
that's already in your book, and you can see it there. These are departments where the book that we gave you on Monday doesn't have an updated version, and a couple of departments have gotten back to us and say that we need to tweak them a little bit.
Okay, great.
Titles have changed, or grades have changed, or things like that, or we missed a position. So
Okay, that's
we're giving
fine.
you some update pages on those, but for the fire and the other departments, the ones in your book should be accurate.
Okay, thank you.
We, along with the position summary, we do an FTE calculation that Alderman Arnett has asked for. Those columns are not done yet on the table because the especially hard one was the harbor master has moved. The harbor master has moved under the city manager, and they have a lot of part-time positions, and that affects that table. We haven't changed that yet. City dock funding update, that's done a lot of shifting. I'm trying to think of a way to kind of show what it was last year, what it is now, and just do a summary page on that. And then, as you know, on the internet, on the city's website, you can get to the OpenGov link that Katie's provided, and go in on any department and click on that department and see detail all the way down to the account level. So that's available already to you. Next slide. To start out, we'll talk a little bit about '23, closing out the year. These are our best projections as of this time. They're hopefully conservative. We have general fund revenues projected to be $98.3 million. That's about $1.9 million over what we had budgeted. General fund expenditures are projected to be about $100 million, 100.3, and that is $5.1 million under budget. That leaves us with an additional amount of $7 million on both sides that we had not anticipated. Some of the additional revenue sources quickly, building permits were very strong this year. Interest income was an unexpected surprise from the rising interest rates. We've been collecting more from our bank accounts on that. During the COVID years, interest income was almost negligible into our revenues, but now we're at the $2 million level, which is where we were before COVID, and I expect it to be higher, a little bit higher in '24. We also got 2.1 million excess in income taxes that we didn't anticipate. We had a $9 million budget, and it came in a little over 11 million. On the savings side, as you see, the departments here that created most of those savings. Finance is one. As you know, I've been talking all year about the trouble we've been having recruiting. We lost people. We lost staff to two of them to the federal government for spots, and then trying to fill those has been very difficult. The procurement officer position has been vacant for the year. That's a good section of that amount. And then we've had other various positions in accounting and accounting associates that have been vacant. We're working on it. We're close to getting fully staffed. So I'm looking forward to that time when we have everybody in place. The police, as you see, $2 million of savings due to vacancies, and another 500,000 because I know, if you recall, we got additional SAP funding from the state aid for police protection. It's just money that the state allocates to us through a grant to cover police salaries. And we had typically gotten around the $1 million amount, and this year we were surprised with an extra $500,000. So that's $500,000 of salaries that doesn't have to be borne by the general fund, and they understand they're going to get the same amount next year, and each year we get an update as to what our allocation is going to be. So, hopefully that will continue, but we're not certain, but that is part of the reason for the savings in the police department. Fire had $800,000 of savings. It's in various places. Some of it's in their salary and benefits, but there's also some in some other accounts as well. So that's just various causes on the fire side. Next slide. So talking about the revenue side, the good news, as we talked about, we're 1.9 million in excess of what we had budgeted. And that, coupled with the savings on the expense side, means we will not have to tap the ARPA funds to get through the year in the general fund. We had planned last year, we thought we'd need $3 million, and we will not need that this year. So the ARPA funds remain intact. The general fund recurring revenues will increase by $3 million over what the FY23 is projected to be. About a little more than half of that is due to a growth in property taxes that we're anticipating. And then we're anticipating increases in several other revenue sources. On the state income taxes, FY23 was strong. We ended up with, I think it's about 11.3 million, and we're anticipating 11.6 million in '24. I'm hoping that'll come in stronger, but that is a revenue source that's really difficult to predict. And until we see what's coming in from those income taxes for the calendar year 22, we won't have any really strong estimate on what we're going to get, but we do expect an increase.
Jody, how do I do questions? It's the 60% for property taxes. That's a lower percentage than usual, isn't it? Doesn't that reflect other?
I don't know how that compares to the previous years. It varies. You had
But that's a good thing. That means that
yes, because income taxes are strong. We're getting more from occupancy taxes. We're getting more from ambulance fees.
Yeah.
The recreation income from the pool and the harbor master rentals are very strong. All of those mean that percentage can go down, that we're getting bigger revenue, larger revenue from other sources, and then we're not so dependent on the property taxes, which is good, but as long as those continue. Sometimes those can be one-offs, and then the next year we're back down again. So we like to see growth in a steady source from property taxes. It's the only thing that the council really controls as far as the rate.
Thank you.
And then on the the year-end general fund balance is strong, and we're going to be able to not only provide for our 15% required reserve, but we'll be adding to our other reserves as well. Next slide. So again, we have our challenge. We're in programming for ARPA use, which we are in 24. When we project out revenues and expenses, there is that gap there again. This year, in 24, we're anticipating 2.8 million to be used in the general fund. What that does is use that ARPA source for expenses that could grow over time, such as salaries and benefits. So we call that a structural deficit because it's built into what you are projecting for the future. So the goal now is when the ARPA funds are gone, which is halfway through our FY, I think it's December 25, it goes away. We have to have it committed by that time. And after that, we have to find revenue to fill that gap or curb the increase of the expense side. Either, through salary and benefits, lowering the amount of COLA, that kind of thing that we give, because you've got to keep the growth of your expenses within the growth of the revenues that you have coming in on a regular basis.
Question? Is there another option to raise taxes
Yes, that's always an option.
incrementally so that we don't keep having or predicting a structural deficit?
So so one thing, let me just say, for the past 2 years, we've been predicting that we'd have to use ARPA funds to close the gap. Our revenues have been strong and our expenses come in under budget, so we haven't had to. So we may not be in this position next year to have that structural deficit. But yes, you could, each year the council sets a tax rate. You can set the rate at whatever you want to. It's just the constituents, it's a difficult thing for constituents to see, the property tax rates, and that's one of the political issues that you'll have to deal with if you decide to increase a tax rate. So their property values will grow every year, and when they do, when you apply the same tax rate, we get a little more in property tax revenues, which is the 1.6 million that you saw on the previous slide. Every year our revenue goes up. At the end of this year, we'll go through our triennial property revaluation, and we'll see what the property values are doing, and then we'll be able to predict what that's going to provide for us. FY 25, 26, and 27.
And I understand how the need for us to be able to justify if we have incremental increases. We were supposed to do a survey, 2 years ago, to ask the community what they valued the most.
Mm-hmm.
We never did that.
No, we haven't done that yet.
And I think there is a very legitimate way of showing a need so that we can eliminate the structural deficit. We shouldn't be counting on, I don't feel, that we should be counting on having a structural deficit. But rather, we should find options for eliminating it in the future. And, that survey, like I said, never came to pass, but that would help the community recognize the need.
So there are, first of all, we would never, on an ongoing basis each year, I'm not going to come to you and say, let's spend more than we've got coming in. So as we come to next year and we see how it looks for the future, and we know these other revenue sources, and we can project what we think expenses are going to be, and we need to start looking at sources of revenue. It can be property taxes. It can also, there's other options, and I think I have, I don't know if I talk about it on this slide or not. I think there's ways that we can improve what we're collecting for occupancy taxes. I don't think we're enforcing that enough, and I think that there's more there that we're not getting. We can also take a look at our fees, our various fees. As you know, in the last couple of years, Rec and Parks, Planning and Zoning did some fee adjustments. But every year, we should be looking at fees to see which ones we can increase to cover the cost of the service. Those fees are supposed to be set in order to cover the city's cost for providing the service. So theoretically, every year, your costs go up, so should your fees. But you don't want to raise fees every year either, because that's time-consuming, and I'm sure the constituents won't want to see fees going up every year. So every few years, we should be looking at fees in different groups to see if we need to increase them to current costs. And so that's another potential revenue source. It doesn't have to be through the tax rate. That's what I'm saying. Then when you look at all those options and you look at your fines and your collection of fines and try to get full compliance on your occupancy taxes, then you decide, do I have enough revenues to cover what my expenses are going to be? And if not, then you have to decide. I either want to increase the tax rate, or when we go to union negotiations next year, that will limit what we can offer in the way of pay packages.
Mr. Malinoff, I think you were going to add something.
Yeah, I wanted to mention on the survey front, I think the last time we did one was 2013, and we've talked about it in the audit committee, and what we're going to look at doing again this coming year is the National Citizen Survey tool through ICMA to get that kind of information. And what's good about it is it compares us to other communities, and we can customize particular questions. And I would come to you and the department directors for those custom questions.
I would just like for us to plan ahead, and you mentioned the cost of service. I don't know whether you're going to get into enterprise funds or not, but are we keeping those at the level that we are supposed to by code to provide those services?
Yes, we are, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later.
Thank you.
And so we've answered on the survey, and I apologize that we haven't moved forward on that. So, and I do at MML, and I'm sure we all agree that we are pushing for what we think should be a percentage of a sales tax or something that can come to municipalities. And in my last conversations at MML, feel like in these next couple of years we have a shot at that. So, yeah.
That's great. And they do surveys too, and I'm sure, Mr. Malinoff, you've used MML over the years to help in that other front. So yes, thank you.
All right, we can go to the next slide.
Jody, I haven't been through the whole book yet, but is there a chart in there, a table in there that compares the expenses and revenues for the past few fiscal years?
So
As well as projected?
in the book, up front, there are summary schedules that show you department as a whole. You have FY 22 actual. You have FY 23 budget as originally adopted, your budget as it exists today, and the projections for 23, and then the 24 budget. We can pull data for previous years if we need to, but you'll have to let us know how far back you want to go. We do have that unduplicated analysis that's in there every year that runs back several years. I don't know which page is it on in the book. 34. If you look at page 34 in the operating book, there's a schedule called unduplicated expenditures, and that adds all the budgets together for all departments, all funds, and shows you what we're spending overall, and shows you the overall growth in the budget over time. And for a couple of the years, we have explanations as to what causes the increase. That gives you an idea on overall growth in the budget, the city's spending.
Okay, I see the general fund at the top. Where would I find
what page are you
total
on?
expenses? 134?
Are you sure he's on the same page? You said general fund was at the top. If you go down partway, down the schedule, you'll see grant grand total, it should say grand total, not grant total, sorry, all funds. And and then what we do in the next section is we take out the duplicated appropriations. For instance, the general fund sends money to the fleet replacement fund. But you don't want to count that twice when you're looking at spending, because the fleet replacement fund then spends it to buy cars. So then if you go down to the next subtotal before adjustments for unbudgeted funds, that gives you a comparable, what I would, if you're going to analyze this, I would go to the bottom. Katie, go to the next page there. Where it says unduplicated appropriations. That's really the total that tells you apples to apples, what we're looking at as far as total city spending year to year.
Which one?
It's down on the second page on 35. That schedule continues across the second page. And you want to look at the total unduplicated appropriations.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I think I've seen this in the past, but something I would like to see is just a line chart showing total expenses and total revenue.
Yes, well,
Again,
that's something we're going to do for the general fund anyways. That's one of the things I like to, when we do the projections, do it in a line chart to show you projected, here's what we've had in the past, here's how we're growing, and then if there's a gap there, that's what we have to address in the future budgets as far as spending.
Yeah, okay. And did you send this to us, or can you send us the presentation? You did? Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
And just quick on this, since the survey was mentioned, and it's more, I guess, a comment for city manager as well as finance chair. I mean, it seems like I think we've had this issue before. I remember saying this of last year's budget, as far as some of the budget amendments that the council passes kind of end up going nowhere. They get passed, they're on the books, but nothing happens with them. So I don't know if we need a better tracking mechanism for the council to keep track of those. I don't know, maybe you've been doing so with the finance committee, and I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm asking about how do we keep track of some of these budget amendments
the past?
like that we've passed, including the survey.
Oh, so they're not.
We've had other one-time use expenses that we've passed over the years. I'd have to look at my notes from last year. I know there were a couple that I brought up that at that time weren't really implemented.
I agree. I'd forgotten about that, so I apologize.
Yeah, well, and that's just nothing
No, I know.
fault on you. I just
Yeah.
think we need a process in place to make sure we don't lose sight of these things.
Right, I have one that, 20,000 for walking the permit system, right?
Right, that's right,
So
yeah.
we don't know what happens to them. I think it's an auditing kind of thing. I don't know how the finance department, I agree with you totally. I just don't know how.
Maybe Director Dickinson can speak.
I can give you a little bit of guidance there when we do this one-time tracker, where we say, here's the one-time funds, here's what we wanted to use them for. On that, we can say what was used and what wasn't used. Sometimes the issue is the council has these initiatives, but there's staff bandwidth issues in order to handle them. And sometimes it takes, for instance, I know Alderman Gay was involved in getting the intern program kicked off. Alderwoman Pindell Charles got the Annapolis United thing kicked off. And then I know that Alderwoman Finlayson was working with those grants, the Adopt a Community grants, helping get that program organized. Now, those are things that we as a staff should be doing ourselves, but when there's limited staff resources, and then we have all this study, that study, this study, it sometimes stretches us too thin, and has to be assigned to one particular person, and that's the city manager's responsibility to figure out who's going to do what, or if we have the bandwidth to take it on at all.
Okay.
May I add, I think if we asked the city clerk, she could probably give us a list of the amendments, because she's got the notes from our meetings.
We already have a schedule prepared that says what you asked for.
Okay, so do you have the status of those? Because I think.
That's what I was just saying. We can note on that schedule which ones are underway, which ones have been finished. Some of those one-time uses are actually from the administration side, like buying a certain piece of equipment, that kind of thing. As far as the amendments that the council passed, we can note whether they're underway or not, or haven't been moved along, and that's how, what I was telling you on this one-time tracker that we were going to provide.
Right.
We will add the balances back. If we don't do something, you don't want to say, I already did this. You add it back, so it doesn't look like you've taken it out of the reserve. The money is still there.
So
So
yeah.
I think the survey was 2 years ago,
It was.
if I remember correctly.
think you're
And
right.
then there was something else that escapes me. There were two items, the survey and something else.
There was a task
Retreat.
force that was supposed to look into combining city and county
That was it.
resources.
And we did neither of those two things. Yeah,
And the retreat,
at the retreat.
and the retreat. That was another part that was funded by that too.
Okay. So, but the other two were 2 years ago. The retreat's more recent, but that's neither here nor there.
So, Mr. Senator, we'll make sure we delegate those things or get them.
Those are the things that make me want to do the job.
Excellent. Alderman Pindell Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was also an amendment that I put in last year for this year, a feasibility study for something in my ward that the mayor was intimately involved in.
Thank you.
But I don't think it's going to come to fruition, and based on that, I sent the parties involved that there was a new direction and that it would not be done, but we'll have to talk about that later. A visit that we made in my ward a year and a half ago
All right.
for a feasibility study
Okay.
that I don't think is going to happen at all.
We definitely know the
unfortunately.
internship program went through and a number of things did, but we do need, you're right, more accountability on this stuff because unless you're reminding me, and I
Oh, I understand, but some decisions were made, and
Well, yeah.
I assumed that it wasn't going to be done, and I didn't want to hold it up or let the people involved still hold out hope. I didn't think it was fair to them, but we could talk about it offline.
So, yeah, and I'll just say again that you can, Office of Community Services had to take on a few extra responsibilities this year because of these programs.
And I'm just one person speaking, but having been the impetus behind this department, we are putting more and more stuff in that department. We have two
That's what I
people
was,
there.
that's what I was saying, that they had to take on some of these extra programs, and I think they were pushed to their limit at some point and have trouble moving everything through. That's what I'm saying about resources. There's the ideas, and then there's the ability and the manpower to put those into action. So I think that's a lot of where the breakdown is.
Yes, I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
No, I was saying that
Yeah.
they worked with yours, Alderman Gay had another program about, it started out childcare and then was helping families. There was a third program that they took on, and I don't recall which one it was. And plus, they do a lot with the
And run
community
the workforce
grant.
development along with all of that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the community grant listing, they deal with that too. So they just have very few staff for everything that was being given to them through those amendments. So we can move on if there's no more questions. Expenditure, good news, healthcare costs, they're going to increase somewhat in '24. Just as we were recommended that we show a slight increase, but because this year, when you look at the the health insurance fund, we're going to have a little bit of excess again that we have to, and we're going to provide a 2-pay period health care premium holiday to employees. So that tells me we've got the premiums still have a little bit of room in them to cover costs. So we won't be increasing the health care premiums on July 1, but anticipate these premium holidays that we've given over the past 3 or 4 years, they're getting smaller and smaller. I think when we're coming closer to getting in line with our cost, we're probably going to see premium increases July 1 of the following year. So we'll be analyzing that next spring to see what we need to do. The police and fire pension costs, the rate is going to be relatively flat as a percent of salary. So that's good news for us. Our challenges, as you know, high inflation and the job competition is driving wages up. We're still having to deal with that. We're still having some trouble recruiting, especially when you bring in experienced people at the higher level of the pay scale. Salaries and benefits are still, if you look at them on a pure, here's what we give on a step and here's what we give on a COLA, project out to grow faster than revenues. But because of the regular turnover savings we have, we haven't had a problem with it yet. But when you continue to grow like that, if all positions are filled, you would have salary and benefits outpacing your revenues. State pension rates, those are going up about 4%. Next slide. I put a slide in here for the ARPA balance update. As you know, we got that cash in advance from the federal government. It's sitting in a separate account, it's earning interest. So the 6.6 million is what we currently have with the interest that's been accumulated on it. We have used a little bit. The year before last, we used it for transportation. But since then, we haven't, and it's there, and it's also getting more interest income because of the earnings rates we're getting now. So in 23, we don't think we're going to have to use any of it. In 24, as I said, we've got 2.8 million in the general fund, and I'm anticipating using 3.1 million of our ARPA for transportation. And that will leave us with a balance with projected interest earnings of just under $1 million to carry into the next year. Now, the transportation fund may not, in fact, have to use all that 3.1 million next year. That's just projecting based on what I can currently see for their expenses and their other sources, and trying to retain more funds in the parking fund until we know how that revenue flow is going to come off the new garage deal and what that looks like. I'm using ARPA funds instead of trying to use a lot of the parking fund revenues.
Yeah, Ms. Dixon, I have a question. For the ARPA funds, when does that expire? When do we have to use that
I think
by?
it's, I keep saying this date, I need to check on it, December of 25, which
okay.
puts us halfway through 26. I don't know if it'll last that long. If we get to that point, and we still have some of that left, we'll have to decide to use it for other things besides operating expenses.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Next slide. Here are some of the initiatives that we've put in the 24 budget. Some of them will be familiar to you. We've put in some funding for Food Fridays in OEM's budget. We've put in some funding for the intern program. That's going to be funded through HR, but also managed from Will Rowell is going to help out from the mayor's office on that. We've got no harm funding in the mayor's budget as well to continue that program. If you remember the conversation about the emergency temporary housing funds that Alderman Gay was asking for, we've included $10,000. It's going to sit in the Office of Community Services, but OEM and the Office of Community Services will be in charge of identifying the needs there and paying out those funds as needed. We've given some additional winter relief money to OEM. APD has asked for several capital improvements, primarily to their building out there, carport for some of their taller vehicles, that type of thing. Those are in the budget. We gave a equipment training and program allocation to Rec and Parks, but we put it in the administrative division so that our new director can decide where that needs to be applied. If you remember last year, during this last year, we took some funding from one of the fire positions and created a quality assurance trainer because of some of the recent issues that we had with the EMS training. And now we're returning the funding to the firefighter position and adding this as an additional position full-time. We are adding $15,000 to economic development budget so that they can do some new initiatives with the businesses. We're making a contribution to the Skipper's Lane construction. There's an extension of that road out there to Forest Drive to facilitate one of the projects. It's going to go in there, and this will help with traffic flow, but we're not managing the construction project, so we will be giving a contribution towards that project.
Question?
Yes.
Skipper Lane, it says the lane contribution. The expectation from the developer, who we hear, whose representative speaks to us at every single council meeting, is expecting a road. There is a need for a road, or they will not have access to their property. So what does this mean? And do we have any idea of whose responsibility are we paying for the road?
So I can't tell you the details. I know that the city is not constructing the road. We had originally thought we might put this in the capital budget, but we're not managing the construction. This is the city's contribution towards the construction project. I don't know if it's the developer who's doing it or some other group that's doing it. I can't tell you that. That's not my.
I reviewed the book and I didn't see this in it. So
There's
can you
not a
tell
lot of
us how
detail
much?
on this in there, so I'll.
There is no detail on it?
Not in the book.
Okay.
It's not in the capital book because it's not a capital project of the city's, so.
I didn't scour the capital budget, but I did look through the operating budget.
There's just the funding in there for Skipper's Lane, but it doesn't say the amount. The amount is like 279, $279,000 towards the project. I cannot give you details on what that does or who's doing what. I'm not the construction expert, so
Okay.
that may be something that planning and zoning is more familiar with the project and what it's going to do.
Mr. Mayor, do you have any more?
Director
I'm
Malinow.
sorry.
I was just going to say we can have Mr. Gerald. I do believe that's the cost share that was required that the developers wanted us to put in to complete the road. But I'll have Mr. Gerald report when he comes before you.
And we're not looking at it as an operating or a capital improvement plan, even though it's going to be a city street eventually.
My understanding is the developers, my friends from the Willows, donated the land, and we're donating some costs to the improvement. They're adding and combining some contribution to the building of the road as well, and they're going to build it when they build their surface parking areas and that. And so we're contributing the money to that, and their construction crews are going to do it. That's my understanding. Yeah.
So this is our contribution, 280,000.
79,000, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we will own the road and we will maintain the road. So they're donating the land, they're doing the construction, we're contributing to the surfacing of the road on the piece of land that they're donating, and then they're connecting it through to their parking assets, I believe. But I can get Director Gerald to give you more
Okay, I
clarification on
appreciate
that. Yeah.
And the American Legion is a piece of that, so I'd like to know.
And, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's funding in there for Annapolis United. Right now, it's going to be housed in the mayor's office. We don't know exactly how that's going to be handled and managed yet.
Director
so-
Dickinson, sorry. Alderman
Yeah.
Pindell Charles?
Yes, I have a question about Annapolis United that you have partially answered.
Yes.
That's going to be part of the mayor's office.
For right now, because of the transition in the leadership there, we weren't really sure, and I don't know if the city manager wants to talk that, we weren't sure where to park it, so we put it in the mayor's office for now, and we'll have to decide on how that's going to be managed in the following year.
I didn't see any mention of it in here except for an accomplishment for OEM. That's why I was asking about. I'm glad I saw it. But the thing of it is there going to be level funding from last year? It's my understanding that it was supposed to be 185.
185? We have 100 this year instead of 185.
It came from one-time funding last year, so the decision will be made whether we want to increase it or make it a permanent part of the city.
The one reason why I'm asking, being public safety chair, and we looked at all the data from last year, and I think you've heard this song and dance before, that's strictly, in many ways, attributable to Annapolis United. And so to reduce it from 185 to 100, I think is not looking at the people that were impacted by that program, which is mainly the youth and the children and the families and those from underserved communities. I mean, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but we look at our bigger projects, and that's fine and dandy. But how about the people that we serve, and that being the focus of what we're doing? And I think, and you all know how I feel about this in many ways, but I think 100 is sorely, especially when we're looking at a little bit more that we have in our budget this year. I think that's woefully inadequate. The other thing I want to mention too, I'm getting more and more and more, and I think Mr. Malinoff was in on this conversation, this email with Mr. Gerald recently, Gibraltar. The number of holes, potholes, people's cars and vehicles being damaged. I know it's a private roadway. I think that was an oversight when we incorporated the parole area into the city back in '51. That's kind of my understanding, but that needs to be taken care of as soon as possible. I can't go anywhere without getting complaints about it. So
that's there, if you look in the CIP, the capital budget,
Okay.
you'll see a page for that project. And
Thank
it's, I don't know if it's everything, we don't know if it's everything yet, but it's the start in trying to determine ownership and whether or not we can take ownership. and
okay,
then
I hadn't
move
gotten
on
that
from
far, but thank
Yeah.
you so much.
In addition, we got received recent information from the Office of Law. They were doing the title work, and I'm pretty sure, and Mr. Lyles is still here, but downstairs, that we're pretty much finished with the title work component of it, so that we can then take the next step for the quit.
Great. I know we did a lot of title work when it came out to Monarch School and town courts. So a lot of that preliminary, I think, has been done anyway. But thank you so much. Appreciate that. Like I said, I hadn't gotten that far, but thank you so much.
And then the last thing on the list, of course, is the Butler statue. And I don't know a lot about that myself personally, but how much did we put in for that?
I can give you a little bit on the Butler statue. You guys probably know more than I do.
Yeah.
But the first African-American elected official in Maryland was a councillor on this city council. Carl Snowden is proposing the statue. We haven't picked a location. He believes that the funding,
I remember.
he'll be able to raise more money than this,
Yeah.
and we're proposing seeding the
Yeah, we
initiative.
only have 10,000 in there right now, just as kind of a starter. We don't plan on covering the whole cost of the statue, as the mayor said, but it's a starter and, put some city funding out there, and then there's hopes that others will raise the funds for the statue itself.
I'm not clear, are we looking, this is our good faith money up front, and then the community is going to raise the additional, or is this a multi-year project for us?
Carl Snowden, or the caucus, brought the initiative forward. I learned through them about this amazing piece of history that we own. He brought it forward with, I can raise the money, I can fund it privately, but we thought just to get the ball rolling and just get a placeholder for it, we'll put forward a smaller amount. And I don't think the cost of it would be a six-figure cost. I think it's
Well, I think it's a great idea,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I like the idea that we're making a contribution in addition to the community. The last monument I did, which was in the 90s, was about $30,000 in the city. So I'm sure it's different now. So,
Next slide. Right, so we have a slide here that shows general fund revenues by,
I have one question before we move on.
okay?
And I hate to keep beating on his horse, but I'm going to keep beating on it. And I'm going to say this. As you all recall, last year when we got the 185, I had to put in the amendment. It passed 5-4, only because I had to wear a dunce cap to get all 5 votes for that. Now, I hope I don't have to do that again this year.
I'm not
But if
gonna
I
let you
do
do that again.
But if I have to, then I will. And I'm just being frank and honest about this whole thing. It was a push and a shove to get it. And I don't want to have to go through this again to get that money.
So-
So I'm just letting you know.
And one of the-
Director, let me, please. We acknowledge that you want the program, and we wanted to make sure, and when we met with the previous director, that was about how much had been spent on the program. And so we weren't meaning any disrespect. And you can see in the budget that it's sufficiently in a position that will allow, I think, the council to address other needs.
And the reason that you probably have some money left over, there was a lot spent over the summer and into the fall. There are not a whole lot of activities that you can do in the winter, in the summer, but we were gonna come back in the spring and April to take care of the rest of the, whatever, $80,000 it was, to take us through June. And so that's the reason why there's some money left over. So if you had asked me, I would have told you. Thank you.
Alderman Savage.
Just quick on that topic, because I generally, and I know you have a lot of great programs that are run out of the mayor's office, but just generally for me, I'd rather see programs that we think are going to continue or deserve to continue year after year. They stay within a department for the continuity, because mayor's office just, it's subject to more just to election, whoever's in the office, where the department's more, has a bit more permanency to it. So I guess that's one, maybe we could dig into a more finance committee if I can make some of those meetings, but I would kind of like to know more about the justification as far as moving, because I think it was in Rec and Parks to begin with.
It was in Rec and Parks. We have a new director there. We, and with Mr. Trader's move to the police department, we weren't really sure where it was going to go and who was going to manage the program, so I think the placement in the mayor's office was more of like a temporary stopping place to put the money there and then figuring out how it's going to be managed and which department is going to manage it.
Okay, well, yeah, and just, I think it'd be good to include the council in more of those conversations, because, I mean, it's just another programmatic issue that we're having coincidentally with Rec and Parks, but you know, if the council identifies a program that we want to see pursued, we expect to see some kind of permanency and commitment to it, and not have to struggle for our various programs that are the public wants or that we want year after year. That's
Alderman Savage, we'll talk offline. I'll explain it more to you later.
Okay, so this slide, if we're ready to go on, is just the delineation of the different revenue groupings. 22 actual, 23 projected, and the 24 proposed. If you, looking down that list, the large increase in the intergovernmental revenues that you see in 24 includes the 2.8 million of ARPA funds that we have programmed for 24. Whereas the 22 and the 23 columns did not use any ARPA funds. So that's the big change there. And then the other line items look fairly consistent, and if any of you look at this and have questions, you can see in OpenGov where the detail is, and we can talk about the individual line items that go into this. But this is just a slide to give you an overview of the different groupings.
Oh, hi.
Sorry?
Yeah, now I'm confused. The ARPA, I thought previously you said.
Okay, yes, but keep in mind that these are actual numbers. So when we set the budget for 22 and 23, we thought we would have to use ARPA funds.
Oh.
So if I would have had the budget numbers up here,
Got it.
that would have shown in there. But we've got actual and projected. We don't have any 22 actual, and we're not projecting to need the ARPA funds, so they're not in that number. So when you see the jump, a lot of that difference is ARPA. In addition, there's a few other sources that are showing some increases. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide. On the parking and transportation side, I've got the actual and projected here, and the 24 proposed. As you know, the parking fund is going through some transitions, so I'll be very interested to see what this looks like a year from now. It may be really, really good. trying to be conservative for '24 on the parking side. In '23, all of the revenue from the downtown parking spaces, the districts 1 and 2, are coming directly to us until the garage goes online, and that's when those revenues are then directed into a trust. So we're seeing the displaced parking and the increased charged parking spots out in the neighborhoods. We're seeing that result coming in revenue this year, which is why you see that very strong revenue number for the parking fund this year. And the other garages are also seeing increases from the overflow from Hillman being shut down. So we anticipated that, although I was surprised to see the premium parking's revenue coming from districts 1 and 2 is pretty strong.
Alderman Finlayson?
I hear rumblings that there may be a proposal to charge city employees to park in Hillman.
Okay.
Is there any truth to that? Mr. Malinoff is
Mr. City Manager?
I'm not choking on the question. I ate an apple earlier, and it's
Sure.
still lingering, like a good
Okay,
teacher.
I'm just-
I've talked to Mr. Gerald a couple of times about preparing proposals for the employees to use the parking garage. As recent as today, because we had our one-on-one. The ideas are potentially to incentivize the employees to use the Park Place garage and a lower fee for the Hillman garage. But as we all know, the Hillman garage was not ever particularly filled before, and there's 150 additional spaces now. So I asked Mr. Gerald to come back with some ideas and proposals on how to provide parking for the employees. And I don't know what that answer is yet. One of them is that idea of, you pay X amount per month for here and free for Park Place. But I haven't gotten a final idea.
I would like to know how many spaces we used in Hillman prior to. And I would like to know what it will cost to buy those spaces in Hillman when it opens. Because I am going to move that we pay for our employees to park in what we call our garage, even though it won't be our garage anymore. I think that's only fair. And so we need the data because I'm going to make that argument. Our employees should not have to pay to park
Okay.
in.
I think we all recognize that it's a great benefit.
It is a great benefit. And our employees have been excellent troopers during this renovation or during this rebuild. And they have always been troopers, so, I mean, that's not new. But I think that is totally inappropriate that we expect our employees to pay in our new garage, or even to park out at Park Place on a permanent basis, unless we're going to compensate them for an extra half hour of work every day. That would be the other option. I know you don't like that, so buy their space in the garage. That works too. So either one, but do know that that's what I'm going to pursue.
And I'll just state for the record, we've conditioned some employees to park a little further. It has always been a complaint from the business community that we monopolize the most valuable parking spaces in the city for city employees. So I'm going to encourage to try to keep some of those employees out at Park Place, not to charge them. I don't think we should charge them out there. But I think that while we have the opportunity, we should take advantage of it.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry that you don't stress with the businesses the value of our employees.
Well, I value them. That doesn't mean I don't value
but only
them.
if they park at Park Place. And it's not all about the businesses. Our employees provide a very vital, necessary service to this city.
I agree.
They are the face of the city.
I agree.
And they should be our priority. I'm sorry if the businesses are not happy,
Yeah.
but these employees provide all the services. And so this is a small perk that we should be giving our employees. So, I know you're a businessman, so
I agree that they're valuable employees, and I love them
So-
just as much as you love them.
let's just treat them.
And I've enjoyed getting on the circulator with them to go up West Street, and we've had some fun, and I've enjoyed walking into
Okay.
town with them as well. Thank you.
Okay, I will add to that it's not currently in the budget. If it would either be a direct cost to the city, or it would come out of our waterfall payment that we're getting from the trust, from the new operators of the garage. Either way, it's going to hit the bottom line of the city.
And I realize that, and that's why I'm
Okay.
asking, so I can decide which approach to take.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and on the transportation fund, as you can see, FY '22, we didn't send a transfer from the parking fund because it wasn't needed during that year, and they used whatever grant funds they could to cover their expenses, and that's the extent of their operating needs. Next slide. Some of our revenue assumptions for '24, real property taxes, we're on the last year of the 3-year cycle. We've programmed in an increase of about 1.7 million over '23. Hoping to see more. New development tends to impact that number, but we won't know until we see how many new developments are permitting and coming online. As they finish, they go on the tax rolls. Income taxes, FY '23, we're seeing 11.3 million. We had only budgeted in the $9 million range. And we are budgeting for 11.6 million in '24. We continue to see some improvement in the tourism and group activities. Liquor licenses, those have been fairly flat, '22 to '23. And FY '20 is the highest year that I can see in the history that we show. And this is down, our current results are down from a FY '20 high. I don't know if that's a result of businesses closing from the pandemic or what that's a result of, but that's a revenue source. It had been pretty strong, but it's something we might want to try to get our arms around and see why that's flattening out or going down over time. On the interest, the permitting has been strong, the building permit came in strong this year. I know there's a lot of projects in process that may pull permits for building next year, so we may see another strong year, but we've tried to be pretty conservative in our estimates there because the building permit revenue is variable. It can go up and then down and then back up again, depending on the big projects that are in process. On the interest income side, we've had the federal government, the Fed has raised the interest rates, and that's resulting in extra earnings to us. It's been a good news story for us on the revenue front. We're getting about $2 million, maybe a little bit more than $2 million, and during the pandemic, it was less than $50,000 at some points. So, next slide. This gives you a delineation of the general fund expenditures by department. Because of the limitation of space on the slide, some of the departments are kind of grouped together. So your budget book has more detail. Your budget book breaks down each of these departments by the type of expenditure, so you can look into more about what's causing the variances there. And OpenGov will also give you a lot more detail, as you know. Next slide. This is a pie chart that kind of depicts that previous slide by department. You could clearly see the public safety, the 3 departments together are just slightly over half of our spending. The finance piece of the pie there includes finance non-allocated, which most of that is non-allocated. It includes our debt service on bonds. It includes all of our transfers for capital projects and for the fleet replacement fund and our funding of retirees' health care. So that's got a lot of larger components in it. Next slide. Here we've grouped the general fund expenditures by category, so you can see which categories are going up, going down. Salaries and benefits, of course, is the largest piece. You definitely see in 22 to 23 that increase probably caused by the jump in the police package that we did last year, that significant increase on their pay scale that went across the board to all of our uniformed officers. That's showing in that number. It's not quite as large increase for 24 because for 24, the employees are getting, all employees are getting a 2.5% cost of living increase. And in those proposed expenditures, we also have bonuses again. With the high inflation, when we were doing the union negotiations, all but police union got another $3,000 bonus in fiscal year 24. So that's in that number as well, but that's only spending one-time funds. It's not something that's going to continue into 25. Next slide. And this is that same grouping pie chart to give you a visual. And obviously, we've got a substantial portion of our money going to the workforce in the form of salary and benefits. Next slide. This gives you a picture of the revenues for 24. Again, we have 2.82 in there from ARPA. I want to keep that in mind in that 104. Our appropriations, 109. That difference, again, is us using our reserves. Within the appropriations number of 109 is our transfer to capital projects from the capital reserve fund and our planned use of funds from the one-time reserve. And by definition, the things that are coming out of one-time are one-time expenses. So we've saved up money in these reserves and we are then applying them to the purposes for which we saved them. And that's a planned use of savings. As we end FY23 and the audit's completed, we will determine what the fund balance is going to look like, but right now, as we project, we believe we're going to be adding to the reserves at the end of this year. Next slide. Here's where we think we're going to be. If you look at, what page is the fund balance? Roll forward. I think it's like 18 or something. That one. Yep. Page 20 in your operating book gives you a more detailed outline of this, where it just tells you this is what we're at 22, this is where we think we're going to be at the end of 23 for the different components. In some cases you see the numbers going down, but keep in mind that in addition to projecting that we're going to add to the reserve in 23, we've also spent some of that money in 23. So the net result is what you see in the column in the middle. And the 24 column just projects that out for 24, but assumes that we're going to spend every dime that we have budgeted. So and that's what I would say, just a real loose projection right now, because we never do spend what we budget.
That one confuses me.
Okay, so these are what we project to be the year-end balances and fund balance.
Yeah.
All components.
Yeah, I'm trying to reconcile it with page 21. Like, okay, I was just curious on why you do a projection for 23 and for 24.
Okay,
Instead
so on the, where's the 17904, should tie to that number. So if you look at the top of page 20 and look all the way up to the top right,
Yep,
you'll see 17904, 136.
yep,
And that's where 24 would end up.
yep.
If we were perfect budgeters and we all got every dime of revenue to the dollar and every dime of expenses were spent, which doesn't happen.
Are perfect.
Yeah. So if you see those numbers there should line up with that line, those top four lines on page 20, because this is just for the general fund.
They do? Yeah, 24.
So I hope they do. You know, every time this happens, I think, oh, did we make a mistake somewhere?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so you're just showing us 23.
Yeah, we were just, this is a snapshot of the
You're
balances.
just showing us for FYI only. I
Yeah,
gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Next slide. All right, so this is kind of a blow-up of our fund balance policy. At the end of this year, we look to the next year's budget, and we look at the revenues for general fund, parking fund, and the transportation fund. We add those up, we take 15% of that total. That's the amount that we need to keep in fund balance reserves. That number is $17,904,136. The way I'm projecting currently, we're going to end up with $23,676. So therefore, that $5,772,000 is the excess that gets divided to those fund balance pieces. And then the breakdown on the bottom shows you where we project that they would end up, according to our policy. We can only put into the budget stabilization fund the amount of the limit. You calculate the limit at 3% of those revenue numbers up there. That's as high as we can get it, and that 218,000 will get it there. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Pension costs, we talked a little bit about this earlier, the police and fire actuarial study. This year, our pension rate as a percent of salaries is 34.1%. It's only going to 34.25% of salaries. That's only estimated to impact us by $38,900. It's a very small increase in dollars for us. And again, as we always do, we're contributing the actuarially recommended percentage of salaries. On the state pension side, their contribution rate is going from 10.93 up to 11.32. That's the 4% raise we talked about earlier. That's expected to increase costs in the general fund by $77,000. And in the other, the total citywide impact is $104,000.
Question?
Finlayson?
Yeah, thank you. Is the employee contribution equal to, in both of these?
I'm sorry, I'm not following your question.
We
Equal
have
to what?
employee contributions to the police and fire pension, right?
So the top section is talking about the police and fire pension plan,
Right.
which is for police and fire, and then like we take the salaries, every time we pay salaries, we take 34% of those salaries and put it in the police and fire pension plan.
So they don't make a contribution?
Oh, how much? Oh, yes, they do, yes.
Yes,
I'm not
I
going
just
to be able
wondered whether
to
it was
say that. I think
comparable
it's some, I know on the state side, it's 7%. On the police and fire? Who's back there? 8%. Oh, thank you. Somebody knowledgeable in the room. Yeah, so I know they're close in percentages, but they're not under the same pension agreement, so 8%. So they're putting in their 8, we're putting in 34.25 next year. And then we follow along as the actuary evaluates all of the factors and gives us a projection of what we need to put in.
Okay, thank you.
So I tried to put on a slide here all of the workforce impacts that are in the budget. So this is a lot of data for one slide. Like I said, we're going to do a 2.5% COLA for all employees, and we're extending that to the contractual and the temporary employees as well. We've got $3,000 bonuses for all exempted civil service employees except for the police union members. The merit steps are, of course, funded. As we set aside, and I think we spoke of this a couple days ago about the amount we've set aside for potential reclasses and upgrades resulting from the study that we're doing. We put $250,000 in finance non-allocated section. If that study results in recommended upgrades and reclasses, then we can start implementing those in fiscal '24 instead of waiting for the next budget cycle so that we could get a head start on those changes. We have 4 people in the police department converting to civil service. As you may recall, we've set a policy that's been agreed to by the state that our policy is when we take on a full-time contractual person, we've got 5 years to convert them to civil service. And we have a few people in the police department that are in full-time contractual, and 4 of them are near the 5 years, so we're going to move them all to civil service, enroll them in pension. Harbor Master has another one that we're going to convert to civil service. And the police are getting an upgrade of one of their PCO1s to PCO2. They're currently filling a supervisory role. They have a shift that needs a PCO2, and they don't have enough positions, so they've been paying one of the PCO1s acting out of class forever. So they had that need, and we funded that this year. Transportation drivers, we're giving an increase to the minimum hourly rate to $25 an hour. We're having a lot of trouble trying to recruit drivers. Other driving companies are paying more than we are, and they've had a lot of vacancies in transportation this year. So the director asked us to add some more funding so we could implement a higher rate, and hopefully we can attract more candidates for our open positions there. And then on the right-hand side, what we've got is new positions. We're adding an office associate for some administrative help in the city manager's office. The PIO currently is using an intern, I know, for some assistance on some of the PIO work, but would like a part-time contractual assistant to help with some of her work. And finance, so if you remember last year, I had a reorganization of the finance department, and in that reorganization, there were a handful of new positions, and we were awarded 2 of those positions last year. I would like to add one this year. However, I'm going to take a full turnover reduction for it because it's not practical that I'll be able to fill that in the grants administrator this year. We don't have any space to sit anybody down. So until we have permanent decisions on space, I can't fill the one that I have, and I can't fill this new one, but I would like to be prepared for that for the following year when the time comes. So this will not have any fiscal impact on the budget this year, but hopefully, if we land in a space that's larger, I'll have room to fill out the department. MIT would like to add an analyst. We've granted that position. Planning and zoning, we're recommending an office associate for them and another planner. As you know, that is one department that has a lot of work on their hands, and it has a hard time staying staffed and getting a lot of their work done. So they've asked for another planner. On the transportation fund, they've asked for a part-time transit supervisor from one of their off shifts. They need a supervisor there, and they don't have enough positions to cover all the shifts. And then the mayor's office would like to continue the assistant ombudsman that we have budgeted there currently, and we're adding some more contractual funding in there for that position.
Yeah, one matter I want to mention about the ombudsman. That was a position that was initiated and generated to take a look at whether we need, first of all, a full-time position for that, but also do we have the validation to say we need not only a fiscal note, a staff note for ordinances, but also do we need an equity note? So that's what that position is, part of what it's being used for. And I know that person is helping out our current ombudsman in that position now. So just to kind of make it clear as to what the direction is for that position and what the end game is. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Finlayson, then Alderman Savage, then Alderman Tierney.
I'm just pretty shocked by all of the new positions. And what is obviously missing to me is the Office of Emergency Management. I'm not sure why that position that needed to be correctly upgraded has not been considered. And we can add a lot of new positions, and we can't take care of the people who are already here. I'm just bewildered.
So in any case where the department asked for a reclass or an upgrade, we have put them, except for this PCO, which we're pretty much paying for a PCO too right now anyways, so there's no fiscal impact of that. But we're doing in the study all the reclasses and potential upgrades so we can do them all at once, because OEM was not the only one that asked for that type of upgrade. So we're doing that in the study and only putting in the new positions to the budget at this time.
I understand the study, but this is not applicable. The upgrade was recommended the last time there was a study, which was 2 years ago. 2 years ago, there was supposed to be the upgrade, and it did not happen. And now it's going to be postponed until the next study is done. I think that is inappropriate and unfair, you know. I just don't understand why we're going this route. And I know that we're afraid of opening a can of worms and everybody's going to want to be reclassified. But that position was reclassified, recommended to be reclassified 2 years ago. 2 years ago. So how are we going to fix this? This needs to be addressed, because it's going to come out over and over again until it's fixed, and it's a problem that does need to be fixed. We have 8 new positions up there, and we can't take care of the one person who's been here doing the work for how many years? It needs to be fixed. And Ms. Dickinson, I know this is not,
No, I'm just going to remind you that we've put money into the budget to facilitate those recommendations that come from the study so that we don't have to wait till the next budget cycle to implement them. So the funding is lined up, it's just not delineated within the departments for the proposed budget.
so are you saying that the director or the deputy in OEM is going to be reclassified and paid the additional salary, and I would suggest the back salary for 2 years? Is that already in the budget? Is that what you're saying?
No, so we are conducting the study, and the study will be done by experts that do that for a living. We will take their recommendations, and then the city manager and HR will decide what goes first, and I'll let him speak to this, because it's...
I do understand the new company, but we had the old company who made the recommendation and did the upgrade. That's what I'm talking about. I don't care about, I do care, but I'm not dealing with the new company. Haven't even hired a new company. But the old company made this recommendation 2 years ago.
May I? Michael Malinoff, city manager. I just spoke to the HR director today that this will be the first item, these deputy positions in the study. So I would be shocked and surprised if it's not done before the budget.
Not done when?
Before the budget starts, the
Before
budget
the
year.
budget is struck?
Yeah, because several months ago, we started this conversation with the HR director. I initiated it with this issue and other issues that we've been dealing with benefits and compensation related. And then Director Dickinson came to us because of the projections, which they've had not that long, and said, I think we can afford to do it now, knowing this issue and seeing what we're seeing in the budget. So that's why everything is moving so quickly on the study. And I confirmed, and she said she was going to send me the language. I haven't gotten it today, but that this particular grouping of items will be the first review. And that would seem to be that May would be when that would initiate, and the fiscal year doesn't start till July. So it would seem to me that it could very well be done in time for the fiscal year to start, that class. But I can provide you that information because I did speak to her again today, just to have that confirmation, to make sure that this issue would be resolved in a timely manner. And then the other issues would be addressed as the study unfolds.
You do understand.
I understand very well.
Okay, so.
And
you're
mine as
telling
well.
I understand.
Me that
very
it will
well.
be taken care of before we strike our budget.
It looks that way. I'm not going to say absolutely, but I'm going to provide you the information that shows you that I'm relying on. And I had this conversation with the HR director today and before today. She recognizes it too, and that's frankly in part why this is being expedited, because we truly recognize that this is symptomatic of an overall issue that we need to address.
2 years, Mr. Mallow. 2 years.
I respect that.
Thank you.
Alderman Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ditto to those comments. These are probably I think the highest number of new positions we've added in a while, at least that I recall. So I also have a little bit of concern. I look forward to reading the justification for the positions, but also at a time when, I think at the beginning of the presentation, you said that we still have a structural deficit. And looking at the total on page 18 and 19, I'm still seeing expenditures being greater than the revenue. Yeah, I guess I still am a bit nervous about this unless we have projections. If you have any projections you could put out there for FY25 as far as where the expenses and revenues are going. So the bigger question I have, I guess, is where I still don't understand. Maybe you can direct me to a good table here that explains it. But so you mentioned earlier on that we do have a structural deficit, but then you also said we have a $7 million surplus. So I don't quite follow currently as far as how we're balancing out that deficit.
So for the last 3 budgets, when we project expenses and project revenues, we are projecting there's a difference there. And we move forward with the budget knowing we have these other funds we can draw on if that happens. But in every year, in most part because the budget is conservative, we try not to aim too high at revenues. We try to keep those conservative. And then when we're looking at expenses and we project what we'll need, we tend to make it more conservative and make it a little higher to make sure that the departments have what they need to operate. In every year, we underspend. I just can't tell you at the beginning of the year, right now, how much we'll underspend for '24. As a result, and because we've had some nice surprises from revenues, income taxes in particular, occupancy taxes, ambulance fees, harbor master have come back, we've got more revenues than we anticipated, and we're spending at a lower level than we have budgeted. That would tell you that we, in fact, don't end up with a structural deficit. But when you plan for the next year, you want to make sure that you make your best projections and that if there is a difference there, that you have a source to pay for it. And the the ARPA monies that we got, the $6 million, was intended to help cover our operating costs. Had we not had the pandemic, our revenues would very likely be higher than they are now. That ARPA funding could be used by the governments that had it. Our allocation can be completely allocated to operating costs. That's what we chose to allocate it for. And so far, we've only had to use a little bit for transportation. And so we want to use those before we contemplate, do we need an extra revenue source? Do we need to raise taxes? Do we need to cut expenses? We have that resource there in the meantime to use. And it's going to time out.
So I'm sorry, I thought you said earlier that you weren't using ARPA, but we are using some ARPA for.
So when we project into next year, we are projecting that we will need $2.8 million. We almost always have some departments that underspend their budget. We will probably have We'll not have to use the $2.8 million, but as I'm doing now, projecting conservatively on expenses and conservatively on revenues, you want to make that plan to use those funds if you need to.
Right.
And that transportation, if they use all of their own ARPA monies this year, they're going to need some assistance next year. There may be enough from the parking fund to do transportation as well, but I don't know. So we're anticipating we may have to use some of the ARPA funds in transportation next year.
Well, and I understand what you're saying as far as your projections are lower and you end up adjusting that based on how much revenue we actually do get. And I guess that's why on page 18, total revenue, I'm looking at FY23 projected versus budgeted. Adjusted budgeted is the actual, I guess, right?
The adjusted budget, during the year, the council considers adjustments to the budget, supplemental appropriations, fund transfers. The adjusted budget reflects changes to that regard. We have,
Well, I guess where can I find, for example, and I know we haven't closed out FY23, so maybe you don't have this, but I'd like to know how different your projections are as far as the projected versus actual, as far as how much revenue is generated. And
for actual for 23.
Yeah.
So there's a column in there that says FY23 projected. That, and we give that for every fund, for every revenue item, for every expense item. And for the general fund, for instance, we are projecting $98.3 million. Yes, and in the adjusted budget, now revenues don't get adjusted much during the year. So the adjusted budget for revenues is very close to your original budget that you set last year.
Well, okay, let me back. So the original budget in that column says FY23 original budget. That's what we voted on and approved. So those are your earlier projections, right? And then adjusted, the next column, FY23 adjusted budget, that is adjusted as you go through the year based on actual.
If we get a donation, if we get a contribution that we want to spend, we will come to you and say, we have this extra revenue, give us an appropriation, and we're going to increase the anticipated revenues and spend that contribution. So as you see, revenues don't really increase much on just, go ahead.
What's the difference then with FY23 projected, that third column?
So that's my best estimate at this time of where 23 will be at the end of the year.
Okay, so
So we're not quite to the end. We got 3 more months, 2.5 more months to go. In addition, if you want real 23 actual numbers, we'd have to wait for the audit to be completed, and that's several months after year end. But within a couple months after year end, I should be able to give you a really close projection about where revenues will actually end up.
But I thought you said that we're getting more revenue than you thought. Where is that reflected in here?
So if you look at the adjusted budget number, do you see that adjusted budget number of 96,367?
Yeah.
I think we're going to come in at 98,308. That's $1.9 million higher.
I see. I was looking at the last column, total of all funds.
That's got all funds in it, and you can look at all funds together, you can look at funds individually, you can get a breakdown of that general fund revenue number, and there's a schedule in there, revenue detail for the general fund, that you can look at to see where those variances are, which ones are coming in higher, that kind of thing.
Because I see where the general fund actual is going to be, well, what you're projecting is going to be higher. But if you look at all of total funds, it still leads to our total revenue being down versus the original budget, down 2 million.
Yeah, so if we look
160
at,
versus 162.
well, and so you've got a lot of different kinds of funds in there that are funneling this, and on our adjusted budgets for our CDBG, we had 7 million, but we only ended up with 3.2 million. I mean, a lot of that's grant driven, and, I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, grants. I'm looking at the wrong line in here. The grants are down from what we anticipated. We didn't get all the grants we had programmed. Or we ended up spending less, so we're going to get less grant revenue back. That's the primary reason for that. You see some of the reductions from budget in the enterprise funds as well. We anticipate sewer revenue coming in at a certain level, and it's a little bit less than we anticipated. So we don't always have more revenues than we budget, but
And where's ARPA in that?
ARPA
Revenue.
fund, in the general fund line.
Oh, it's in
But
general fund.
I'm going to direct you to, where's the revenue detail for the general fund?
Page
Which
20.
page is it on? Is that it? Go to page 22. 22 and 23 is a two-page breakdown of all the revenue sources in the general fund. And then I'll tell you where the ARPA monies are.
Okay.
The ARPA monies are on the second page of that presentation, in intergovernmental revenues, the first line.
Okay, all right, so you're proposing 2.8 million?
Yeah, so you see last year we had program 2.4,
Yeah,
and we don't need any this year, so in your projected
see.
column, it's
Okay.
0. And then in 24, we're proposing to use 2.8.
now how much do all these new positions total as far as new expenditures? And all
We
the
have that somewhere, don't we?
$3,000 bonus?
Go to unduplicated.
I mean, I guess I don't need it right now, but if you
Yeah.
can get that to me at some point.
We can tell you what we valued each position at. Keep in mind that like the system ombudsman is already being spent this year, so we're funding that this year. We're just saying we're continuing it more on a permanent basis. The transportation supervisors in the transportation fund, so not all of those positions are in the general fund. Yeah, so I tried to do my best estimate of new positions and conversions for the general fund, and it's 788,400, including all the benefits and the pension and everything.
Sorry, say that, how much?
788,400,
For,
the new positions that you asked about.
okay.
But we can give you a breakdown.
And yeah, if you could include that $3,000 bonus too, would be good, and all the other.
Yeah, we have, if you look at one of the first general schedules in the front, and we enumerate all the uses of one-time funds, because the bonuses are coming out of one-time funds, because we're not continuing them. As of now, we're not giving any bonuses in '25 until we know what we're doing at the union negotiations, so that's one time.
Just another quick question, regarding conversions from contractual to full-time. I know we had some kind of trigger. Is it an
Right.
automatic?
So we have
They
five.
automatically
we-
have to be proposed as a full-time after some years?
So what happened with the trigger was a dispute with the state that we got audited, and we had contractual people that had been working here for a while. And for our own policy, we thought we were covered to say these people were not going to have pension, they're contractual. But the state, in our talks with them, they said, if you set a policy, we'll review your policy, we'll settle on the policy, and we'll make sure the policy is worded correctly. So that was one of our issues. We set a policy that you can have a contractual position for 5 years, full-time. But at that time, you have to convert them or get rid of the position. Because when you hire somebody contractual and you have them work full-time, and you don't give them pension, the state sees it as trying to avoid enrolling them with the proper benefits. That's the way they view it. So they say if you need them after 5 years, they should be a permanent position. They should be getting pension benefits as well.
Does that apply to all contractual, or do the contractual?
Full-time contractual, a lot of our contractual people are not full-time. And I think the HR manager should come and be more to explain the details on that policy. But it's my understanding that all full-time contractuals that remain in place that are not grant-funded, because some of those contractual people are grant-funded, and by definition, grant-funded positions, when the grant goes away, the position goes away too. But if we are funding full-time positions with general fund monies and we have them here for 5 years, they need to be converted to civil service.
I guess I'd just like to get a list, I guess, of the positions that are below that threshold? Because I think we have a couple of,
There's a
Contractual
few, there's a
positions
few
that are
more
not
that aren't to the
technically
5-year point, that are newer, that have been here for a year, 2 years.
well, I mean the ones that are not contractual full-time, they don't meet that threshold, but we've had them contractual for 5+ years without any kind of conversion review. I just want to get my head around how many of those employees we have.
Okay. So according to our policy, if they're not a full-time, and I'm not sure what the definition of full-time is, it's not 40 hours a week or 35 hours a week. There's a definition there that fits. If we have them at a certain level, they would fall into this category, and the others would never fall into that category and would not need to be converted. Okay? Any other questions?
And I think we all appreciate that the city's never been busier, that people are trying to move here. You need
Yeah.
staff to manage that, for example.
Yeah.
Planning and zoning is severely depleted. The 3 positions that we need there. We've had a high rotation in leadership in planning and zoning for some reason. So, this is a result of, what's coming at us. So I want to know how much longer we need for the presentation.
I think I've got about 10 slides to go.
Okay.
Because I might hold questions
So
till the end,
we
if that's
can-
okay. I do have to go to another meeting at 5, so.
Okay, and I'm not even following the time, so we got about 12 minutes. So I have parking fund impacts and some of the fluctuations there. We have, the revenues are only 87 less than I have budgeted, so that's a pretty good estimate. Like I said, we're getting some good results from premium parking. Again, we talked about the Hillman closure and the impacts it's having on our revenue flow. Expenditures are about 689,000 less than budget. And because we're holding back on some of the transfer to the transportation fund, trying to keep the revenues and the fund balance in parking intact, not knowing what the next 12 months to 2 years will show on the revenue side. Making sure we don't send money away when it's not needed. The transportation fund has ARPA revenues that can draw down this year. Hillman, okay, we talked about the revenue going through the P3. That will start when the garage comes online. It's probably going to align pretty closely to the fiscal year, so that's going to change the way our revenue flows. And parking funds, you'll see the increase to the debt service. If you remember, we had the sub-debt through the Medco deal, but we repaid that with some of our own bonds in order to save on debt service cost. So the debt service that's programmed onto our expenses has increased from 23. Next slide. Some of the transportation impacts in 23, I've talked about. They're planning to use their remaining ARPA. That's anticipating they're going to spend every dime of their budget, which they may not, and they may have some savings there and may be able to carry some of their own ARPA into next year. The parking fund, I said in 23, we're going to send 1.4 million over. That's what I'm projecting now, but that's less than what was in the budget. The city in 24 is going to plan to supplement some of its ARPA funds to transportation. I hope that's not all needed, but that's what I'm projecting at this time. And in 24, parking is going to send over 1.4 million. And then this time next year, we'll be reassessing the waterfall payment, how much we're getting and how much we can move to transportation and make sure we have enough flowing to the transportation fund for their activities. These are the enterprise fees.
I have a question, sorry.
I'm just going to hold questions till the end because we only have 10 minutes.
Still have a question about the previous slide.
Can we come back to that, please? Because we've been asking questions the whole way along, and so.
Ask questions, I'm sorry, but I'll wait.
Yep, thank you. And we can go back to the
And we'll
slide.
go over so I can ask my question.
We'll bring the slide back for you.
The enterprise fees are all increasing this year, as you see there. Sewer rates up by 3%, but that's the first increase we've seen in sewer rates in several years. A lot of their capital projects are moving forward now, and they're spending, so they're contributing more in cash to the capital projects, and the debt service costs are going up. Water rates are going up by 4.75%. And keep in mind, all of these increases are based on Stantec's consultant study, projecting cost out several years, looking at the remaining fund balances in these funds, and then determining where we need to set rates in order to have both a gradual change in rates and to keep the fund balance at the level that we need to have it. Watershed's going up by 7% and solid waste rates going up by 10%. And you see there, the last bullet tells you an average quarterly bill for a single-family residence going up 6.2%. I don't know if we're having Stantec in to present with Public Works, but if we do, we can look at some of these in detail if you want to. Next slide. This is just, we don't have to go over this in detail. This is just a summary of the CIP funding sources for '24, what sources we're drawing on to pay for some of these capital projects. Next slide. And this is pretty much the wrap up here, just takeaways. We are financially stable. We have been for the last 5 years. We set during the first year of the administration, set some very strict policies, and we've done some careful budget efforts through those policies, and it's resulted in strong fund balance reserves and maintaining spending within our budget. ARPA funding, we've talked about, it's not going to be available beyond FY25. And so I anticipate that coming up on this next budget cycle, we're going to need to review all fees and fines and increase our enforcement efforts on some of our revenue sources, so make sure we're maximizing everything we're already supposed to be collecting. We'll get the new property valuation sometime in the fall, and we'll be able to see how that's going to impact our property taxes. We have already begun some of the early inquiries on setting up another pension option for non-public safety employees, more of a defined contribution plan, which is helpful to the employees and also helpful to the employer in that we can better plan pension costs that way. And as a result of that pension option, if our newly designed plan, if we're trying to incentivize employees to move to a different plan, we may want to set aside some of the one-time funds for an incentive program, but we'll have to see what we develop and see if there's going to be any need for that. And then the results of some of these steps will dictate how we go into the union negotiations, knowing what we have driving those costs and the revenues coming in, and then know what our parameters are for those talks. Next slide. So these next two slides are just the budget timeline. We've outlined the dates there on the budget process over these next few weeks. Next slide. And the final slide is, isn't there one more? All right, and the dates of the department reviews. So these are just two budget, these schedules are the last two slides. All right, so that's the end of the slides, and then we can take questions till my voice wears out.
Thank you. Could we go back to slide 23 for Alderman
Yeah.
Finlayson? Thank you.
Where is the funds from the garage, what's the not ARPA funds, what's the collaboration?
AMRP.
Yes. Where's the funding for transportation?
So what happens so the money from the parking garages and the parking spaces goes into the parking fund. Now it's divided into two flows. The new P3 deal from Hillman Garage and the revenues from the downtown parking spaces goes to a trust account, and that trust account is managed by AMRP's AIR is what they call it, AIR. It's the branch they've designated to operate the garage. They are hired by Medco, technically. So they are going to be taking those trust revenues. They are going to be using them to pay the debt service on the Medco bonds. Then they pay the operation of the garage and the enforcement of the downtown parking. the net result comes to us as revenue. So that's what they call the waterfall payment. The waterfall comes down, it funds different things, and we get what's left over at the end. That will be coming into the parking fund, and we will be getting that on a practical basis twice a year. Every 6 months, we get that payment, whatever's there. Then on the other side, the parking garages that are still under our operations and the other parking spaces outside the downtown district, that revenue comes into our parking fund like it does currently. Then after we anticipate we're going to have monies coming off that will fund transportation, which is where you're going with that. We take that extra amount and send it to the transportation fund to pay for transportation activities.
My concern all along with the garage and our outsourcing it has been the fact that we will not be able to generate funds for our transportation system. And what I'm hearing is, while we may get some funding, there's no determination, or I don't want to say prediction, of what level of funding we're going to get, if any.
So there is a model, a very detailed model that AMRP has put together, projecting even out the entire 30 years. How much they project is going to be available coming off that stream. Now that model was done when the Medco bonds were sold, and it had around $1 million every year coming off the bottom of the waterfall. But remember, we refunded the debt that they were going to pay, a piece of that debt. We're going to get more than that off the waterfall now, and we issue debt that we now have to pay with some of that. So we're going to get more than $1 million. We will be using it to pay parking expenses for some of the debt service, and then the rest can go to transportation. So the other half of that funding flow through the parking fund should generate additional excess revenues to go to transportation. So there is a projection of what's going to come off the waterfall. It's just there's a lot of variables. And in the first year it goes into effect, I am less certain of how this is going to play out, what it looks like, when it comes to us, what months we get them, how that fits into our budget. So in these next couple years, I've been very conservative with my estimates. There is also the belief that the projections in the AMRP model are low as far as revenue is concerned. They were very conservative with anticipating how much parking revenue is coming from this deal, that it's going to be higher. But we won't know until we see. So over the next 2 years, we are going to have to assess what's coming off this flow, what's coming off this flow. And we're hoping, and we were always planning, that it would be enough to fund transportation. And fortunately, in these next couple of years, we have some ARPA funds we can draw on in case it doesn't. But we're just going to, we believe it's going to be enough. We can't be 100% certain. So I'm glad the ARPA funding is there on our side and on the transportation side. And trying to leave as much fund balance in parking as possible in case we do need to draw some extra out of there for the next couple of years. And then hopefully this new deal will show us that we've got plenty coming off the waterfall transportation.
Okay, I just want us to keep
It's
that
always
in
on
front of us.
my foremost thoughts every time I'm looking at these budgets.
Okay.
And I'm watching through the year what's happening in those transportation and parking, because it's been a changing picture these last couple of years. It's one way, then it's this way, now it's this way. And once everything settles, we'll know more where we land. We have projected it. We believe it's going to be enough. But if we don't, we'll be watching it very carefully.
Thank you. 2 more quick questions. Could you go to the screen with all of the enterprise funds and the increases? And while you're bringing that up, did we negotiate the
It's
$3,000 stipend for
19, 20,
civil
21,
service?
22.
Was that part of last year's negotiations, or how?
Hold on. I'm trying to find the
one
slide.
where you
I think-
shared the increases
yes.
in each of the enterprise
It's,
funds. That's not it.
No, you need to go, yes, keep going. Right there.
That one, yeah.
Now, what was your question
But
about
my
this
other
line?
question was, the $3,000 stipend that we're giving for civil service, was that part of last year's negotiations?
It was part of last year, well, yes, and we gave it for 2 years.
Okay,
So everybody but police union is getting that for 2 years in a row.
but everybody, the other 3 unions are also getting that
Yes.
$3,000?
Yes, and we've extended that to the non-represented employees as well.
Okay, so that ends our 2-year negotiated agreement. So we'll be going into negotiations next year. Okay, and my last question is, all of the enterprise funds are taking hits, increases. Are these based upon service or just what Stan Tech recommends?
So Stan Tech works hand in hand with Public Works, my financial statements, and Public Works input on what their upcoming capital projects are. They use our capital budget and program. It's all their numbers are coming from us, saying, here are our plans, and they built in, here's what we think costs are going to do over time. Here's where we think revenues, they have a model that if you change your rate, it pops out with the new results. Most of these funds, except for Watershed, have like an extra cash fund balance built up. And so they're trying to set the rates with gradual increases so that we can use up some of that fund balance, because we have a target fund balance, and right now most of them are over their target fund balance. We're trying to set rates so that we use up the extra fund balance, and then over time, our fund balance is at the same level as our increase, so that we're steady. And when they come here to talk, they can present their models and show you some of their tables that they use. But these are the rates that are needed to keep up with operations and any debt service cost on capital projects, the water and sewer bonds and the refuse bonds and the watershed bonds. And sometimes we do cash funding of some of those capital projects as well with PAYGO. So they set those rates in order to meet those needs.
It just looks like the residents are taking hits on their enterprise funds.
This year, and remember, we faced a lot of inflation this last year or so. So to me, I'm not surprised at this. The last 2 or 3 years, we didn't have to do anything on sewer rates. It was 0% because there was enough balance there, and their capital projects weren't moving along very quickly. But now they're at a stage where they're starting to fix everything, and the capital projects are spending. The debt levels are going up for sewer, and the cash funding is going up for sewer. So we're seeing that now, and that's a little bit delayed. Water rates have tended to go up. I don't know what our lowest is, between 3 and 5% every year consistently. That's not a surprise, knowing how much our costs go up every year for salaries, vendor costs go up, that kind of thing. Probably when they come to present, you want to talk about watershed and solid waste. Those are the higher increases and what's causing them. I wouldn't be the one to speak to, why the sudden increase there.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you also, Director Dickinson, for being so conservative, because every year we get a surprise, and you haven't let us down for 5 years. Thank you so much.
Well, yes, but there's a part of me that would love to be able to exactly know what's going to happen and project it ahead of time, and then have no surprises at the end of the year. And then we wouldn't go through all we think we might have a structural deficit, and then we don't, and the ups and downs. I'd rather be able to be a better estimator.
So we are 6 minutes over now, Alderman Tierney. So
Just really quickly to the staff ads, was
New
it your
positions?
intention, the staff
It's back a couple
additions, whatever
slides.
you want to call it? Was
Right
it your
there.
intention to list them all, or, because in preparation for Monday, I saw that the fire department has a net add of 1 captain.
That's the
Which one is that?
where is it? It's not in there. It wasn't in there? I think we we edited this a little bit this morning. I think we
That's what I asked about earlier.
It wasn't there. The quality assurance manager is a net add to the fire department. That should be in there. We did not intend to take it away. I'm sorry.
Chief Romelli, you don't get it? No, sorry. And
Yeah,
then
that's what I asked earlier.
He was probably back there sweating, because it is on their position table. You're right.
it
And
is,
I believe we had it on there this morning, but.
Yeah. And then on the property tax Are we gonna have to wait to the end of the year? Won't we get some idea of any sort of assessment, third quarter?
So they're already doing some of their surveying on the properties right now because I'm tasked with giving them some information on Park Place, parking spots, et cetera. So the state's already started their work.
Yeah.
We should have that in the fall. I'm not sure I've ever been here when we first get that. Here's your 3-year increase. That might have been right when I was coming on board before. But we should know well before we start our budget process what those assessments look like.
Okay, and I just have to ask this question real quickly related to what Alderman Bill Nason was asking about as far as the garage. Is the concession payment intact, or is any of that being used to pay off anything at this point?
Okay, so when we got the concession payment during the Medco bond sale, it came in
Right.
2 pieces. Concession Part A, I'll call it, from the Series A bonds, concession Part B, from the Series, the subdebt. We got a chunk from the subdebt. And the concession Part A is still in the city dock project. Concession Part B was used to pay off the subdebt. In addition, we then issued our own bonds and put them in the project and used a few of the B bonds, we used those to pay off the subdebt as well. So during that transaction, the concession Part B is gone now.
But it resulted in savings in the long
It
term.
resulted in overall a significant amount of savings in debt service.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Excellent presentation. I'm sure we got a long way to go from here, but thank you for putting that information out there. I did want to take a moment to announce some sad news. I'm sure everybody's heard that we lost one of our city employees, Kevin Scott, a young guy in his 50s, gentle, lovely human being, probably gave me some of my first permits when I came to this city for business. He has a family. So if we could just take a little 30 seconds of silence for Kevin, please. Thank you, everybody. Is there anything else for good order?
Mr. Mayor, I see that Ms. Eldridge has offered to put a yellow ribbon on our front door.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. That's great. Yeah. Thank you all. Okay, meeting adjourned.